What would an ancient Roman think about a king going up to heaven? Easy. This is apotheosis. If you've been to Rome and up at the far end of the Forum, the top end of the Forum, you see the Arch of Titus, wonderful great arch. And if you stand under the arch and look up, there's a carving of the Emperor Titus being turned into a god at his death. His soul, a little bird-like thing, is being taken up to heaven. Now, of course, the ascension of Jesus is not like the ascension of the soul of a Roman emperor. They used to do this, when an emperor died, they had the funeral pyre, and there was a slave who was bribed or threatened or whatever, who had to swear on oath that he had seen the emperor's soul ascending to heaven, and that was the kind of official mechanism whereby they said, right, that proves he has been divinized. Sometimes they didn't do that when the emperor had been scorned and scoffed at. You may know that when Claudius died, Seneca, who was the great philosopher and was the tutor to Nero, who succeeded Claudius, wanted to scoff at Claudius in order to say what a great man Nero was instead. And so instead of the divinization of Claudius, Seneca wrote a whole satirical book on how instead of being turned into a god, Claudius had been turned into a pumpkin. The apokolokintosis of Claudius instead of the theosis, the pumpkinification of Claudius. But anyway, so the idea of divinization, they knew about this stuff. It meant you went up and you became divine and you deserved worship, and you were now part of the pantheon of the gods who are running the world. So that though, of course, Luke is not writing Acts in order to say that Jesus is just like that. But if you were an ancient Roman reading this, and ancient Romans would have read this, some of them, then you might have thought maybe this is the reality of which the Caesar cult is simply a ghastly, distorted parody. And when you think of the purpose of Acts, think of those great two sections, Acts 1 to 12, Jesus is the Messiah of Israel. How does that end? It ends with the present king of the Jews, the Herod of the day, taking up arms against the church and then himself coming to a bad end. But the second half, 13 to 28, is the gospel going out into Caesar's world. And as we'll see tomorrow or possibly the next day, depending on how fast we go, it's tantalizing at the end of Acts. We want to know what happens at the end when Paul gets there. And all we're told is Paul ends up in Rome preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ and talking about the kingdom of God openly and unhindered, right under Caesar's nose, because Jesus is Lord and Caesar isn't. This is the point of the book of Acts. Already we should get it. Temple, culture, politics. Main themes, the worship and the lordship of Jesus. And therefore in Acts chapter 2, I'm going rather fast because my watch has gone quicker through this than I thought it would. In Acts chapter 2, I just want to suggest this, and this is going to be the foundation for what I'm going to get to tomorrow. In Acts chapter 2, the story of Pentecost. Again, I won't ask you what you preach about at Pentecost. There are 1,000 sermons you can preach about here. But if you come to Acts 2 with that theological understanding of what's going on in Acts 1, this is how heaven and earth have been brought together. These are the people who are going to be the ones through whom God's glory will go out into all the world. Then it seems to me we ought to read the story of Pentecost with this rushing mighty wind filling the house and the fire and the wind filling the disciples as itself a counter-temple statement. This is like the scene in Isaiah 6 when the glory of the Lord fills the house. Only now it's happening to these people, and it is equipping them to be the means of God's glory going out into the world. You know, Paul in Colossians 1 has that wonderful phrase, Colossians 1:27, when he says, to me it has been given this extraordinary gift to make known to the Gentiles the secret which God had hidden for ages, which is now revealed, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. And we in the Western world have shrunk that. We've turned it inwards. Christ in me so that I will be glorified. Christ in you, singular, so that you will be glorified. And then if we're clever, we notice actually the Greek is plural. Christos en humin. It's not en soi. It's in you, plural, the hope of glory. But whose glory is it? Yes, it's our glory in a sense. The glory of God in and for us. But I think in the light of Colossians 1, I haven't got time to do a whole exposition of Colossians 1 tonight, it's bigger than that again, because Colossians 1:15 through 20, as you know, is all about the cosmic vision. In him and through him and for him, all things in heaven and on earth were created. In him and through him and for him, all things in heaven and earth were reconciled, making peace by the blood of his cross. Is God going to step back from that vision and say, well, that was a nice idea, but actually creation, well, we can leave that and we'll just have human beings all by their little selves? No. Christ in you, the hope of glory. The ecclesiology of Colossians and I think of Ephesians includes this idea that when the church goes out into the world bearing Christ in the power of the Spirit, this is the sign to the world already of that filling, that flooding with the glory of God, of which Isaiah and Habakkuk had spoken. The earth shall be full of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. And the life and witness and mission of the church is the sign already of how that happens, that wherever the people of God are, there in that place, there in Durham, there in Malibu, there in Iceland and in South America and Southeast Asia, Africa, everywhere, there is already Christ in you, the hope of that glory. That is what I think Acts is all about. And that's why as we go through, the church is a counter-temple movement, and the church is the movement which hails Jesus as Lord, and so runs into trouble with other people who think that they are running the show. And in between worship and sovereignty, we have the whole question of human culture. And what we're going to see, God willing, over the next 36 hours or so, is at least some little pinpricks of how the early church navigated those particular challenges, which may, I hope, generate some reflections on how we do as well.